Hello, Moadim L'Simcha. I want to go back to last week's Parsha Mitzorah to understand the concept of the challenges that we face, perhaps in this particular time, and at various other times in our lives, personal and national. In last week's Parsha, we encountered the purification of the one who became impure, tameh, through leprosy, through some kind of a plague. Is that a good thing that he was impure, or is it a bad thing? The concept of a blessing in disguise actually comes up later in the Parsha. We have the same concept of a plague-like occurrence or growth on the walls of a house. Now, this seems to be a bad thing. Nobody wants that, because if they have that, then they have to tear down the walls of the house. That's no good. But yet the Torah uses a strange word, and God says, I will give. What do you give? You don't give a bad thing, you give a gift. And indeed, the rabbis say there is a gift in that plague on the house. Why? Because the Amorites, who lived in the land before the Israelites came, would hide their precious jewels inside the walls of their houses. So when the person who owns the house that gets this type of plague has to then tear down the walls, they're going to discover those precious jewels. It is a blessing in disguise. And sometimes the most difficult things that happen can be a blessing in disguise. The late great Rabbi Avraham Twersky brings a fascinating midrash, a surprising one, that God was a little bit upset that Jacob was complaining about what had happened to Joseph. Jacob, as you recall, had lost Joseph. He thought he was dead. He didn't know that Joseph was in Egypt. And God says, why is Jacob complaining when I'm busy here taking his son Joseph and manipulating things so that he will become the viceroy of Egypt? Now, that's a very strange midrash, because Jacob had no idea that that was happening. So how could you expect Jacob to be grateful to God when he didn't know the good news that was on the way down the pike? Rather, we see from here, says Rabbi Twersky, that we need to understand that even the difficult things that happen in life, to our people, to ourselves, to people we know, may contain within them, or do contain within them, a blessing in disguise. There was a Talmudic character, Nahum of Gamzu, his slogan for life was Gamzu L'Tova. This too is for the good. It's a blessing in disguise. And somebody on the level of Yaakov Avinu should have, according to the Midrash, been able to see beyond the immediate problem and understand that somehow this is going to turn out to be a blessing in disguise. That's for someone like Yaakov Avinu. But the principle remains true. The house has to be knocked down, but it's a blessing in disguise. And perhaps impurity, especially through this leprosy, or whatever you want to call it, this type of plague or discoloration, is a blessing in disguise. Now, who is the one who makes the leper impure? Well, obviously, we would blame the disease, the plague, the nega, the leprosy, whatever it is. But it's not the leprosy. Maybe we'll go psychological and say that what causes the person to become impure is their own negativity in life. And here's an important lesson as well. Why is the person impure, say the rabbis? Because they are a slanderer. They speak ill of others. Who speaks ill of others? Somebody with a very negative outlook on life. Somebody who is bitter and seeking to find blame to go and give to everybody else for their own unhappiness, for their own negativity. And is that negativity that creates impurity. The most powerful and potent impurity, Tum'ah, that we have is contact with a dead body. Why is that so impure? Well, because that is a very depressing event. It is a negative event. It causes a person to take a negative view of life when they confront the reality of death, and therefore they need to become purified from that impurity. They need to once again restore a sense of hope and positivity and optimism to their lives. So impurity may have in it negativity, and the one who gets leprosy because they slander others obviously has a very negative view of the world, a view that needs to be repaired. So that might be the psychological explanation, that the person causes themselves to be impure. And we'll accept that, but we're going to add an extra few people to blame for making this guy impure. Perhaps the 10 righteous people that were not in the city of Sodom are also to blame. What am I talking about? So there's a fascinating law that seems to defy logic in the previous parsha of Tazria. If a person has on their skin these lesions, they are declared to be impure under certain circumstances. However, if the lesions have spread so that the person is entirely covered with them, they are white from head to toe with no live flesh visible on their body, then they are pure. Excuse me? I would think that all the more so they should be impure. If they're entirely covered with this tzarat, with this leprosy, whatever it is, they should certainly be impure. But no, only if they are partially covered are they impure, they're tameh. But if they're completely covered, they're not tameh anymore. And the commentaries are puzzled by this. Why is this so? And I think there's a similar case in Jewish law of courts and capital cases. There's a similar law that, again, defies logic. What's the law? If you have a capital case, somebody is accused of murder, for example, and it comes before a Sanhedrin, a court of 23 justices. So the process requires that the justices give an initial indication of how they will vote, whether to acquit or to convict. And then there is the debate and all of the give and take between the justices until they arrive at a final decision. The law states that if all of the justices stated their initial view to convict, and not a single justice was ready to argue to acquit, then the person goes free. Excuse me? If half the court wants to convict, then we, and more than half the court wants to convict, then we convict the guy. If the entire court is saying we're going to convict, then he should certainly be convicted. He certainly is guilty, you would think. But the answer is no. So we see sometimes when there is too much of the negative, too much of the too many convictors among the initial opinions of the judges, or too much leprosy on the person, then specifically they are then pure, not impure. And the person is not tried. So how is that supposed to be understood? The answer is, when Abraham was praying on behalf of the city of Sodom, and he was saying to God, God, please don't destroy the city of Sodom. If there are 10 righteous people, he goes down to, if there are 10 righteous people in the city, please spare the city for the 10 righteous people. And one could ask, what good are 10 righteous people? The city probably has hundreds or thousands of citizens, and if they're all sinners and evil, what good are 10 nice people going to be? But that's exactly the answer. The power of good to grow and to influence is very great. But there must be good there to grow and to influence in the first place. So therefore there had to be at least a core of 10. 10 is the minimum number that can influence a larger society. If there are 10, then they can change Sodom and save the city, and God should wait and give them time and a chance and the space to do it, to save that city and to cause the Sodomites to repent. The same thing, if a person is completely guilty, in other words, all of the judges think they're guilty, then there's no chance that he will be acquitted. And we have a psychological axiom that a person never looks at themselves as if they are a rasha, as if they're evil. They always have some kind of justification for what they did. And if there's not a single judge willing to articulate that justification, the person will never get a fair trial, and therefore we throw the case out. Because if you have no opposition, then there's no chance for a change. And so too by the one who has leprosy. If he's completely leprous, then there's no chance of influencing him to change. His negativity is too strong. He cannot see that there is decency in the world. Who is it who makes him tameh, who makes him impure? The Torah says it in straight language, the Kohen. The Kohen is the one who makes him impure. It's not that the Kohen pronounces him impure, diagnoses him with impurity. The Torah, the phrase, if you take it very literally, is V'timei oto HaKohen. The Kohen makes him impure. Why? Because impurity, Tum'ah, is a blessing in disguise. There can never be a case of Tum'ah where there is not the possibility of it becoming tahor. A designation as impure means that there is definitely the possibility of achieving purity. Therefore, a dead body is not impure. It is contact with the dead body that creates the impurity. But the dead body itself is not impure because it can never become pure because it's not going to live again. Well, Techiyat HaMeitim, the revival of the dead, is another question. Therefore, we learn an important rule that Tum'ah, that impurity, is a blessing in disguise. It means that the person has the hope and the chance to improve. And this leper, who spoke ill of other people because he had a negative view of the world, how does he discover the possibility of becoming tahor? When he meets the Kohen. And this is the responsibility of the Kohen. The Kohen is like the 10 tzaddikim in Sodom. The Kohen is supposed to represent all that is good and lovable in human life. He is supposed to be an example of a loving, caring, concerned individual, someone who you cannot hate. I had a teacher at Yeshiva University, the great Rabbi David Lifshitz, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and there was one student in the shiur at the time who had a lot of problems with the Rebbe because he disagreed with a lot of the things the Rebbe was teaching. But at the end of one of the shiurim, so Rav David took one of his students' hands, and the way he would shake hands, he'd put his one hand on top, one hand on bottom, and hold your hand, and you felt like this was your grandfather just showering you with love. And this other person who had just been arguing loudly with the rabbi during the shiur, looks at him as he does this to a student, and he says, "You can't help but love this man." That's what the Kohen is. You can't help but love him. And this person who has such a negative view of the world meets this Kohen who you can't help but love, and that breaks that negativity. All of a sudden, there will come into this person a little bit of live flesh, a little bit of a seed with which to become completely pure. So it is the Kohen who makes him impure by his wonderful personality. And that impurity that the Kohen gives to him is indeed a gift. It is a blessing in disguise. May we all see the blessing that is disguised by all of the tribulations that our people are enduring. May that blessing become clear and visible to us very soon, speedily in our days.